summary of the submission process for this module. Um, yeah, just kind of look at a run through from start to finish, and also some kind of important information to keep in mind. So, jumping right in terms of what to submit, you're going to be submitting three components, two more significant than the other. So first thing that you're going to be submitting is your Unreal project file. So this is going to be your actual nuts and bolts construction of your project in Unreal in a format that I can access. Um, and as part of this, this will be your copy of the assessment folder. The assessment project that will contain the tutorial sequences and the gameplay sequence. And then um, from there, you're gonna have exported a version of your game as like a playable project, so I can kind of pop it open and have a look through the project, um, as a kind of product almost. Now, as part of this, you can either bundle the two of them together into one project, into one game, in the form of having like a menu if you want to uh, have it so you can choose between which you load, um, by creating a separate scene and then having you pick between with some kind of UI element. Or you can go for the easy option and have two files submitted under the same uh, format or folder. And then the third element is just a simple text document that's just going to have any references for code that you've used which wasn't yours, or materials that you've used, or all that stuff. And then, other than that, if there's any specific info that you want to include in your projects, that's the kind of the place to put it. Have a real good think about if there's anything that might be missed by me that is almost inherent to you as part of the submission. Try and make sure that's documented. I've had it before where students have submitted work, and because they've done some janky folder structure, they've nested the project, in the place it's not meant to be, stuff like that. So make sure you're clear with where stuff is and where it's formatted in this folder. In terms of a deadline and where it's being submitted, so the submission will be on OneDrive. I need to check with Dom to figure out when the folders will be sent out to you individually, but you'll basically get a link, and then you'll have an individual folder in this kind of array of different folders. You'll submit into said folder, and if you do it after a certain date, it'll be invalid. Otherwise, get it done before then. The deadline itself is the 14th of December. This is standard across all of your modules. This is at 2 p.m. So, as I'll be going into later, please try to make sure you get this sorted ahead of time. So just running through the different kind of elements of the project. So the first one is the tutorial exercises. So the tutorial exercises are, as you probably know by this point, you know, the various things that I've had you doing week to week as part of the lectures, and as part of these tutorials, there's like individual components which make up the rubric or the assignment brief. Almost like a checklist. So if you've completed these tutorials, and you've done it in a way that matches what I've covered, or at least at the bare minimum covers what I've produced in the tutorials, you're going to do fine in this section. These are very kind of, obviously, it's easier said than done, but like these are relatively straightforward marks to get. It's just a matter, there's not much ambiguity or subjectivity here. Like, if you follow the tutorials and you check against the rubric, you should be able to get at least above 20, possibly even closer to 30 in terms of marks if you've executed it correctly. All of the tutorial content is online now. This is it. Like we've covered everything more or less. So just if you have any questions on this front, please get in touch. Again, we're coming pretty close to the end of the course now, so you need to, if you've got stuff to ask, do it sooner rather than later. And again, just to emphasize this should be in the tutorial exercises scene. You might have had your kind of elements scattered over multiple scenes where you've been like experimenting and stuff. They need to be collated into one scene and kind of arranged in those 9 different sections. You might have spare sections. That's fine. It was just basically to give you like compartmentalized spaces. So the next element, which is the one I kind of really want to have a decent talk about, is the gameplay sequence. So this is something that I brought up a good few weeks ago, and from talking to quite a few people this week, it seems like it's the area that most people have neglected, which is worrying because it makes up 70% of your grade. As part of the project, you've got 2 scenes that are included within the project that we gave you. The other one is gameplay sequence. This is basically your... we've kind of equipped you with knowledge as part of the tutorial exercises. We've given you a bunch of knowledge and information. It's now your kind of opportunity to take that information and kind of innovate beyond what was covered in the tutorials. So, whether it's taking the elements that were covered in the tutorials and kind of, what's the word? Like finding compelling ways to integrate them. What I don't mean by that is just using the same elements and just plonking them in the scene. What I mean by that is, let's say you take the... let me think of an example off the top of my head. We've covered power-ups, for example, or collectibles. Let's say that you use a collectible system where, if you gather a certain number of collectibles and then you go over to a door and then step or push on a button, the door opens. Where it'll only open if you've collected a certain number of items, and maybe you have like a UI element to reflect that. So like that's stuff that we've covered in the tutorials, but as separate components. So we've covered things like UI elements, we've covered pushing buttons, we've covered power-ups, but as separate entities. So finding ways to kind of blend them together. I'm sure, and you could do another thing like combine that with a cinematic event. So there's lots of opportunity as part of this to kind of innovate and experiment. Obviously, I've spoke to a lot of you about trying to keep the scope of your project small. Remember that you just need to produce a minute of gameplay. There has been some of you that have gone over that. Realistically, the longest I'm going to play your games for, I will spend a decent amount of time marking the project, but if it's clear after 5 minutes of gameplay that I'm still nowhere near the end of the project, I'm probably going to stop playing. Just because like it's I'm going to be going through your projects quite thoroughly, but if you're building something that's quite obtuse, let's say you've built a 3-story maze and there's not really anything else of substance in that maze other than just sending me around a series of walls, I'm going to stop playing. So, try and build something that is kind of quality over quantity in terms of, kind of a smorgasbord of technical elements. If you're struggling for ideas, I know some people, even at this very late point, I still haven't started this. One thing that I would recommend in terms of ideas is find like a point of theming for your projects. So as an that kind of complement with mechanics. So for example, like a horror theme, for example. You can do stuff like have use post-processing effects. That when an enemy is nearby, you could kind of add like a post-processing effect to the screen. You could have it that when you could have audio tied to the enemy. So like as an enemy's walking by, you could have like audio playing. You could have if we use Slenderman as an example, it's probably the easier way to do it. Think of it the other way around. Like Slenderman as a game is like pretty straightforward to build in Unreal. Like you've got your items that you need to collect in the space. You've got the torch attached to the character. You've got an AI that like follows you. Probably the hardest bit is the element of telling which way the player is facing. But as part of a horror experience, like there's lots of components that are quite easily to replicate. Another example would be something like a spy game or a what's the word? Espionage game. So things like security cameras. Having like a security camera that triggers an alarm or something like that. You could use something like the noise emitters to alert the enemy guards. You could have like an object that you approach. Let's say either a bomb or some kind of computer. You could have like extra UI pop up on the screen whilst you're solving a problem. There's lots of kind of opportunities if you use a theme. Another one's like a temple. Having platforms that move or traps that emerge over time. Or space. Like each of these things, there's kind of opportunities for technical mechanics from the thematic space. So I rather than just trying to approach this from creating some generic environment, use something as use theming as a means of creating complementary mechanics. And again, there are some people that haven't started this yet. I'm quite worried about that at this point. Like, there isn't that much time left. If you are feeling that you are slipping behind and you haven't spoken to me already, please, you need to reach out realistically in the next week. Otherwise, there's not going to be enough time to get something done. So, try to reach out in the next few days, if anything, once this video goes live, because it's getting really, really close to the deadline now, less than 2 weeks. If you haven't started it, that's quite a mountain to climb at this point. Yeah, and then other than that, just make sure that you check the rubric. The assessment is pretty straightforward in what it's asking for. In particular, if you just then this just to clarify, this 11% is, I believe, for both elements, not just this in itself, but having your code commented and your project organized constitutes over 10% of your grade. That's an entire grade boundary. So if you just have like a well organized project, like that is going to constitute enough of like a good grade. So if any of you had questions on this, like, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Like, as I said, at this point, I just want people to kind of get up to speed on this, because, as I said, this is the area that I'm most worried about for people. What I'd also like to say is this should be kind of obvious by now, but I appreciate you're still first years, so this is potentially still, you haven't had to go through this arguably traumatic process. Losing work is such an agonizing experience. It really is horrible. I've had it happen to me before. I've had friends who've literally had to like reset years because they had hard drives corrupt, or work be lost in on their computers, or be stored in temporary space and have it vanish. If you haven't already, please back up your work. In particular, this was brought up previously, make sure you've backed up your work before you go home for Christmas. if you haven't already, because if you have bad internet at home, you're gonna struggle to be able to upload, your backups. And realistically, I'm not going to accept lost work as an excuse for this module. There's so many opportunities and means of storing work nowadays. You can get a hard drive if you want. To clarify, I would never buy a terabyte hard drive. Always buy, if you've got the option, multiple smaller hard drives rather than larger individual hard drives, because as nice as like a terabyte hard drive is, it's not going to matter if it fails. It can have as much space on it as it wants, but if all your information's corrupted, it's a brick basically. So if you can afford one, that's great. But if not, there's tons of online solutions that exist out there. Like OneDrive, I believe through the university you get something like 15 gigabytes. Google Drive, I think, has about that amount. Mediafire, Dropbox. There's loads and loads of these platforms that exist out there for you to use for free for uploading your content. So there's no excuse. From here, like this coming week, I'm going to be asking you all, whether you've backed up your work, and I want to make sure that you don't have to go through the experience, because it is truly miserable having lost your work. And as part of that, make a copy of your project, so your entire Unreal project, which I can appreciate is it's like 2 or 3 gigabytes, so that can be quite cumbersome. But you should just need to do it probably for the purposes of this project, and at this point, do it once now. If you've got something that's relatively stable and is functional, back it up now. The same thing for your game itself. Export a version of your game out, even if it's not 100%. Just get it exported now, so you've got a version. So if your computer dies or some act of God happens that means that you lose your work, you've still got that backup and that version you can submit. The thing is like, when it comes to this submission and this module, like, I am not looking to fail you. Like, I want you all to succeed, and I will, do everything in my power to give you the grade that you deserve. The problem is that if you submit nothing because your work has been corrupted or failed, there's very little I can do to help you on that front. If you submit nothing, I can't give you a grade. If you submit something like an earlier version, I can still salvage some marks for you. So please make a backup, make an export of your game now. And, for more widely for your modules, make sure you've backed up your work, because for the very small amount of time it takes you to back up your work, if you balls this up, you're going to have to retake in the summer, and that's just not something you want to do. Coming back to what we were talking about before with the different elements of the module, this is a piece of advice not only for this module but for in general. Make sure with this module you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. Up till this point, there's been a lot of focus on the tutorials. From as early as week 6, I've been mentioning the gameplay sequence for you to be getting on with. A lot of people have been kind of leaving that till last minute. And if you look at the grade breakdown, that is a colossal amount of your final grade. Like, if you're neglecting that area, for this component in particular, it's looking at potentially dropping multiple grade boundaries if you leave that element, if you neglect it to the point that it's barely finished, which can make a pretty substantial drop to your grade. Same for the tutorials as well. If you neglect this area, the tutorial area, you'll probably drop a grade or two. So, making sure that you've covered both bases is really important. Coming back to what I was talking about before, that if you submit nothing for a section, I can only give you 0. If you submit something and you make sure that you've got a reasonable balance between those areas, then I can give you a reasonable amount of marks for both sections. Um, yeah, like I've obviously mentioned the tutorials here, but again, I'll just say it again. Please do not neglect this gameplay section because it makes up a huge portion of your grade. Um, and yeah, feel free to get in touch if you have any questions on that front. In terms of actually testing your game, we're going to be testing the games with each other next week. As part of that, you need to be exporting a version of your game. Do this before the deadline. Do this sooner rather than later. Do not leave it till last minute. The reason that this is important to do ahead of time is because whilst your game may run kind of silky smooth in Unreal, it runs differently once it's been exported, and it also runs differently when you're running it on a different machine. So, you need to try to have a version for this coming week. So we can actually play test it on a bunch of different machines and gauge whether you need to kind of optimize your project. Quite a number of you I've seen have been using like a lot of kind of particle effects and post-processing effects and kind of emissive surfaces and stuff like that. And that stuff all looks gorgeous and good, but my computer is all right. It's not like an Uber computer. Like it's pretty middle of the road, and it's probably about 6 or 7 years old. So like I have got I should be able to run most stuff, but it's if you present something which has got like tons of post processing effects on and has had no effort in optimizing it, it's going to absolutely chug. You need to make sure you strike that balance between your game looking nice enough but not compromising frame rate. So if you can find someone else in the module to kind of play test your games with, obviously this coming week we're going to have opportunity to do that, but at the least try and do like a buddy system where you test someone else's game and you test theirs, just to kind of cover your back. That's kind of really important. And beyond just pure like performance, getting someone else to play test your game to make sure that it's clear what you meant to do. Thinking about having a tutorial, it's not something that we've kind of deeply discussed. I'll probably cover something about it next week, just to kind of give you some pointers on like where to go with tutorial design. Have like a good allow a good window of time to play test your game. Obviously it's easier said than done for some people, but if it's better to at least get in one round of play testing before you submit this thing. So as part of kind of prepping the submission itself, make sure you've backed up your game. Again, make sure you've backed up both elements of it. This is kind of almost separate. This is probably like a good opportunity to back up your game. You can either do a backup of the backup that you've done before, or you could wait till you're at this point to back up. Personally, I would get it done sooner rather than later if you've got the space on your computer or in a hard drive. Get it done sooner rather than later. But basically, before you go through this process of optimizing your submission, make sure you've backed up your work so you don't end up deleting something and corrupting your project. So first thing you probably want to do once you've done this is kind of check the size of your project. So if like most of the people's projects I've spoken to are around 2 megabytes, preferably I don't. I've said here 3 to 8 gigabytes, but you probably want to be aiming for around probably 1 to 4 gigabytes if you can. This is because if you do the maths on this, I've got nearly 60 projects to mark. and if each one of them comes through even at 5 GB, that's looking at a lot of data I'm going to have to use to download these projects, and then on top of that, a lot of sitting around and waiting for this stuff to download. So, and then I've got to unzip the folders too, which also takes a decent amount of time. I had one student last semester submit a project which was 20 GB, and they'd zipped their project twice. So for me to actually get to their project, it took an hour and 45 minutes. And the truth is that you want your examiner to be coming into your project with the best possible impressions from the offset. If you're wasting literally nearly 2 hours of their time to just open up your project, that's without them actually going through the marking process. You're probably gonna have that mindset reflect in your grade if you've done a crap job of optimizing your project. So yeah, I would aim for, if you can, between 1 to 4 GB. If any of you are struggling with that, let me know and I can kind of make some suggestions. There is some kind of options available for optimizing out there. The things you obviously want to probably tackle is things like unused materials and unused resources that are kind of just taking up space within the project, but they should in general be pretty lean. The only thing that will have bloated it is if you've downloaded a bunch of texture packs and additional assets, which if you've downloaded stuff like 4K texture packs and stuff like that, it's probably not a great idea. Remember to kind of have your projects, well organized. I've seen quite a few people's kind of screen shares and just seen like an array of trash where it's just everyone's just got all their assets in the same folder. Everything's poorly named. Please make sure that you've got good naming conventions and good folder structure, and that your code is commented. Because again, it makes it easier for me. It means I'm happier when I'm marking your work. I don't have to go hunting for any elements in certain areas of your project. If you can as well, try and keep your world hierarchy. If you can try keep the stuff organized in there, that's really handy. If you don't have like just a giant sprawl of stuff from top to bottom, that's great as well. So from here, once you've got these elements that we've talked about, the gameplay sequence, the tutorial sequence, as a Unreal project, and then as an exported game, and then your README text file. Have a folder with your name and your SID, your student identification number, and then go through the process of exporting your game. The other thing you need to keep in mind for your Unreal project is the Unreal project itself will be a kind of enclosing folder. So if I very quickly Unreal. So when I say kind of the Unreal project folder, I mean this. So not this, the U project. This, if you just upload this or share this, you'll notice that this is a 1 GB file. So you're going to end up basically submitting nothing. You need to have it be the entire folder, otherwise it won't work. So let's hop back into here. Make sure that there's nothing that's not attached to the project, and I'd ask you to try to keep your project standardized with how you're kind of zipping it. Don't use any kind of external software to zip it. Just use your standard process of right click, send to, and then compressed zipped folder. Make sure that it's the outside of the folder. So it's and just to clarify, I'm showing you this in here. you're going to do this for your all-encompassing folder. Please do not do it for this, your Unreal project, and then do it for the external folder. This is like a pet peeve that really, really got on my nerves when I was marking last time, because, you know, as I said, if you double zip the folder, I have to unzip those, and that can take, you know, yeah, as I said, this 20 gigabyte one I was telling you about, just in unzipping, they double zipped their project, and it took me, I think it was around 40 minutes to unzip their project. And ironically, after all of that, their project wasn't very good, because it was literally just high-res assets that they downloaded to try and fluff up their scene when there was no substance to it. So, yeah, as I said, please, you know, I've seen so many weird things as part of the submission process. I had one student whose project kind of errored out, and it asked me to insert the next CD. I had one student who submitted an actual Trojan horse on their, like, you know, as in malware on their machine, you know, on their submission. Like, it's just, please just keep it as simple and streamlined, so I can spend the maximum amount of time giving you the marks that you deserve, rather than wrestling with the submission. As part of the uploading process, so now that you've got your project all slick and ready to go, do a backup, you know, and use that as an opportunity to kind of test uploading your project. If you're able to, I know this is a big ask, but if you can find either a family member or, you know, someone else to just kind of download, I mean, obviously probably maybe not a family member, but if you can find someone with access to Unreal, to kind of download it on their computer and make sure that everything's working. You wouldn't usually have to do this, because what you could, you know, conventionally do in normal times is you could go into the university and you could test you would usually submit on a CD, and you could test that CD on multiple machines. But in the case of this, we need to make sure that you don't fall at this last hurdle, because, you know, it's with all the work that you've done, we don't want you to fail at this point. And if you've gone through that process, you'll get that OneDrive link. As I said, I'll follow up about that in the coming days. But keeping in mind, like, the current circumstances, make sure that you give yourself at least, and this is bare minimum, 3 days leeway to be able to kind of upload and submit your build. Some of you are going to be going home for Christmas soon, if you've not already gone home, and, you know, your family may have less of a, what's the word, requirement for, like, good internet than what you need for doing this course, or in your kind of modern life, so to speak. I've had it before, you know, I've gone home and, you know, it's been absolute snail mail in terms of trying to send stuff. You know, make sure that you've uploaded you know, if you know that you're going to have bad internet when you go home, make sure you upload your stuff ahead of time. And even if you have good internet at home, make sure that you still upload it with plenty of time to spare, because ultimately, if your Wi-Fi box, you know, goes down, you're not going to have the option of going to a restaurant. You're not going to have the opportunity of going to a library, and depending on the circumstances, you're not going to have access to the, you know, to you know, if you've moved back home, for example, you know, it's going to be a lot harder for you to get back onto the Anglo Ruskin campus. So I really don't want people coming to me on, you know, Monday the 14th at, you know, 12 noon, panicking. At that point, you're basically stuffed. Like, make sure that you sort this stuff out ahead of time. There's ample time at this point to get your stuff uploaded. Obviously, I've gone through quite a bit of stuff and kind of almost talked about it with quite bluntly, but I do want to kind of offer like a glimmer of hope as part of this. which I've kind of reinforced throughout the module. This is something that is a good piece of advice to carry forward with you for your careers, or or rather your academic careers. Um, from a university perspective, it's kind of a numbers game. Like, realistically, you don't need 100% to get a first. You only need 70, and you don't need a fail isn't zero; it's 40%. So if you imagine it almost as like a dartboard, there's a pretty big bullseye that you've got, in terms of, you know, uh, the kind of window in which to pass the module with the highest grade. At 100% is the same worth as 70%. Um, Obviously, having said that, whilst you can consider it a numbers game, uh, you do want to, like, you want to think about these modules as opportunity for portfolio rather than just an academic submission. So, whilst I would encourage you to not get too anxious about, like, uh, you know getting the optimal grade or whatever, um, do think about what, like, that this is a portfolio piece, and this we've designed this module in a way that this is giving you something that you could feasibly show to an employer. A very short, focused, highly polished piece of product. Um, to kind of put some context to the grade itself, and the kind of the rubric, your the tutorials will take you to here. So if you got like a maximum of 30 marks, if you absolutely nailed the tutorials, you're 10 points off a pass. And then at that point, you only need, like 40 marks out of the 70 to get a first. So, like, even if you got like a 20 for the tutorials, and then you got like 50 for the gameplay sequence, that's still a first. So, don't focus hyperfixate on one area and blow another area, because it'll affect your grade more than if you split your work time roughly evenly. Obviously not evenly as in like you spend the same amount of time on a 30%, but as in, like, don't just completely let one element suck up all your time. And just to emphasize one more time, um, even if you feel like you've completely botched an area, or that there's not enough work to really justify submitting, please submit something. Do not submit nothing, because I can't give you anything for nothing. Like, it's just as simple as that. There's still some time left. It's going to be very tight. Obviously, you need to build 1 minute of gameplay, and all of the materials are out there for you to complete this tutorial experience. Sorry, this tutorial exercise. So, there is still time to fix things. There's 2 weeks left, but you'll need to talk to me, and you need to fully utilize the sessions. So, there is a 4-hour block that you have available to work in. A lot of you leave after those sessions. You don't need to be constantly chit chatting to me throughout them, but you need to think of those sessions as time where you would usually be, like, sat in a classroom working on your project in those sections. If you're just attending the lectures and then you're moseying off and I don't know anything. If you're not skiving off, but, like, if you're either focusing on other work, or you're going and making a coffee or something, you're that time that you would be usually, like, you can get this content for this module done comfortably in the time that is allotted for the class very, very easily. Like, I would argue you could get it done in this, in 6 weeks, so 6 weeks of 4 hours, very, very easily. Um, but if you're feeling like you've struggled or you're behind, stick around in this, in these sessions afterwards, and try and fully utilize the time if you can. And then the only other thing I'd say as part of that as well is, I do have office hours left. I've had a couple of people come forward with me asking for help. So if you do want to do that, do it sooner rather than later. Yeah, um, yeah, because I'll try and help however I can to make sure that you do well in this. Cool. So that's kind of everything. Obviously, quite a bit to digest. Again, more than if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with me. Um, Best bet at this point is via Discord. Obviously, you know, please don't contact me on weekends, or past kind of 7 p.m. in the evenings, just because I've already got enough work on my plate. But other than that, I'm flexible most days of the week, and I'll try and answer your questions if I can. Cool. Best of luck getting your submissions done. And just to clarify, for this, next coming week, I want you all to have something to show as part of this gameplay experience. I don't want people to come in empty-handed. So even if it's just getting the bare bones in and then spending the next 2 weeks furiously working on it, um, you know, just turn up with something. Don't turn up empty-handed. Cool. Yeah. Good luck.